Welcome back to Creative Commons, where we talk to creative people about their processes and creativity. I am your host, Andrew Mack, and today I'm interviewing Zea Hirshberg.
Hi, how are you?
So, can you just give us a little bit about yourself? Who are you? What do you do creatively? All that kind of stuff?
Yeah, well, already introduced me enough. But I'm Zea Hirshberg. I'm a senior at High Point University. I'm a double major in media production, entrepreneurship, and social media digital communications. I'm also a media fellow, and I'm from Wolfboro, New Hampshire. I don't know if anyone knows what that is.
You have a YouTube studio you're a part of and have worked on multiple productions on campus. You always strike a really nice balance between keeping relationships with people and also having people in line and working. So, how do you do that relationship management?
Not easily and not always gracefully, I will say that. A huge part of it was just living and learning with it. I started out so young, it just you kind of learn on the job because you at some point you keep like losing and cutting friendships and all of that, and it just kind of eventually takes a toll and you kind of learn your lesson from it a little bit. A huge part of what I do is I keep in my head and I train a lot of voice actors very young to kind of distinguish being on a set and in production versus being outside of it. And they kind of split those two worlds in half. So it's very separate from each other, and they know like when we're in recording, we're recording. When we're working, we're working. When we're not, you can goof off as much as you like, and we're still all friends. We don't really let anything translate from work to personal.
Yeah, I think that I've worked on sets that I've had wide varying rules on like what you can and can't talk about on set. Sometimes it's as simple as just production talk. That's it. Those are not the most fun sets to work on, but I understand why they do that. But ultimately, how do you kind of strike that balance between like, you know, the fun side of things like on set and then like the stuff or the stuff that is like intense and you need to be focusing on set.
Yeah, I think that really does depend. Just because I don't love to limit my workers to things that they can and cannot talk about. Usually, a huge part of us all having personal relationships outside of the studio is just it helps translate to our recordings, and it makes the audience feel like we're actually friends in real life and not just faking it. So a huge part of it is like just mindset, keep personal opinions, argues outside of it, and just kind of be in your character, really. It's not so much as be yourself, although our characters are actually based on ourselves. They're more of be that character and kind of think of everything is live. Like you cannot, like if we're in an actual live session, then you really can't say anything without messing it up and just having all of that blow back on you, and they don't want to ruin their careers.
Fair. And I mean, like, you have to be picky about who you work with because there's certain people who can handle the pressure of this industry. I think a lot of times we don't talk about, especially as creatives, and I'm using the most general sense because I think it applies across fields, is that it's tight deadlines, late nights, and a lot of pressure. Like, even if you're not recording at a late night, managing that side of like, how do you have a personal and professional life, especially when your professional life doesn't stop at 5. Like there is no 9 to 5 in a creative career.
No, definitely. And my studio workers, they all know we usually end up starting at 8, but prep at 7:30 just to get all of our games up and running, all of our recordings. And then we start at 8. And then usually sometimes depending on the episode and their plots, we'll end up going until like usually 10 p.m. But also sometimes we'll go to like midnight. And it's really hard just because I have people from so many different areas in the world. I have someone from England working with us right now. That's 5 hours ahead. It just sucks for them. And I always want to make sure like they're getting their sleep. They're not trying to push themselves too much.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, the other thing is like lack of sleep can inhibit creativity. Like it can prevent people from performing at their best, but also in a creative field where your mindset and you being actively engaged in the process is everything, then you are going to have to be on your game all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that unfortunately a lot of my studio workers lacking because the studio right now isn't their entire lives. They're still in high school. Some are still in college. One of them was an engineer major, and he got like no sleep, and I felt always absolutely terrible asking him like, "Can you come in to try to film right now for like 3-4 hours?" And just you could tell he was so exhausted.
Yeah.
But he pulled it off really well, so I'll take it.
So let's kind of move on to my next question.
Yeah.
How do outside of production friendships complicate relationships on set?
Yeah, that's a big one, honestly. From the sets that I worked on, for the most part, they when we were starting out, especially, we didn't know like we need to keep our personal and professional relationships separate from each other. So it just complicated so much. I've lost so many really good friends and workers because they couldn't keep that separate, which absolutely sucked. I still feel terrible about them to this day. But recently I was on set last semester that didn't keep their personal and professional relationships separate, which was incredibly frustrating just because it just caused so many issues on set that really should not have been there. It complicates everything. You get questions. The director gets questioned all the time. It's absolutely terrible and not an environment I want anyone to be part of.
Yeah, and kind of expanding on that story, I'll tell my version of events. So this is kind of, in general, this is a story of how working on multiple sets at the same time with friends that are fairly competitive can cause you major issues. So I was working on 2 separate productions. One was for a student's capstone. The other one was for a passion project. I signed on to the passion project first, which meant well, number one, I had a higher role in that. So I was the director of photography for that project. And I was more committed because I signed on first. It's kind of a first come, first serve basis with production work in general. So basically from there, I was pouring a lot of effort into one set, and the other person understood, but I still feel like there was a level of resentment that was harbored there. So there was like a level of competition that happened. There was a lot of snippy remarks that went back and forth. And overall, there was instances like where there was, this is probably one of the better instances of this is when Zea, who was actually working on the set with me, got called off of set by the other director to talk about his set while she was working on our set. And I was fuming. So was our director. Everybody was really, really frustrated because, you can feel like that. It's that tension. Like I don't know how many people have worked on set, but you can attest to this, Zea, that there's a lot of tension on set. Like there's a lot of emotional tension between the camera and your actors, between crew, not in a bad way necessarily, but it's like everybody is relying on one another to get stuff done. So you have to be there and show up.
Yeah, and it's also being in that mindset of we need to stay on schedule. We need to make sure we don't go overtime, especially in our industry after, school, when time is literally money. And, you don't – a lot of people don't think about this in the right way, but no one can really multitask multiple films when they're on an actual film set because your mind is all there in case anything goes wrong because there are those people that are relying on you. And that was not a fun experience. And anything like – especially when you bring friendships into production, it can complicate it so much that it becomes fun for no one. Like everyone just hates going, and that's what did happen with the capstone project.
Well, and then overall, I think that what I learned from that entire experience is that everybody on set needs to have a specific role. Like you need to have a specific role that you are achieving. And the other thing is that in HPU, we rarely, if ever, use contracts, and that is one of the things that will protect you the most. Another instance of that for me was that contracts would have saved my butt in one of these instances. I was working with actually one of my high school teachers. She had a band with a couple other people, really, really great people, but we didn't have a contract and we lacked communication, so there was a lack of understanding of expectations on both ends. So it caused us a lot of problems. I I was up late a lot of nights and very frustrated. When I say fuming, like you ever feel that almost like the feeling of like almost steam rising in your body?
Oh yeah.
It's so intense because like, and I think that it was a misunderstanding. That relationship was cut. I lost a client. I lost a paying client in close to the industry that I wanted to be in. So that relationship cost me a lot, but it also taught me a lot. Contracts will protect you, especially when you're working with your friends. I would argue it is more important when working with friends to have a contract in place because if you do not, you risk losing that friend as well as losing a business partner.
Right, and exactly. And I mean, obviously, not all working friendship sets are going to be complicated. Like another capstone I was working with two of my other friends on, and it was completely fine even without a contract. But there are always those really negative ones that you just don't ever want to experience again. You don't want anyone else to experience it either.
And you never write a contract because you think a set will go well. You write a contract because you know it could possibly go bad.
Right. There's always the 50-50 of it going well and going bad.
Well, and even if you've worked with a person before without a contract, you should still put one in place because if you don't, I mean, if you really like the person, then there's a lot of risk there. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, if you want to continue working with them, it makes it easier for everybody if you have a contract.
Exactly.
Let's move on to our third question. I know we experienced this on one of the sets that we worked on last semester, but how do you give feedback? Like how, especially if it's negative, to people who are putting a lot of their emotions and pride in a certain project?
Yeah, I think strictly speaking with the studio, especially with just all the amount of crew that we do work with, we try to do yearly reviews just so that then they know, hey, here's how you're doing right now. Here's what you can improve upon. We always try to deliver in a very nice manner, not as in just we're being extremely mean, but we also don't want to beat around the bush with it. Mm-hmm. Even with people with big egos, even then you still have to be blunt to a certain extent, but also be polite about it because then it could just go wrong in so many ways. They'll start badgering you and it doesn't feel good for you. It doesn't feel good for them. And so just trying to always stay polite with them and keep in mind that respect, but also know that they need to know what they're doing wrong. Otherwise, they can't improve it, and they might actually get worse.
Yeah, I feel like that's very, very true. I think the other issue is that you run into people who don't want to improve. So you can give them as much feedback as you want, but you have to realize that you can't change somebody. You can offer them your opinion, but that is the only thing you can offer. And sometimes they'll listen and sometimes they won't, and you have to be okay with that. And if they stop meeting the standards of your production, then you have to move forward and make a different decision. I think the problem with creatives is we personalize everything. And I know I'm speaking to myself here in a lot of degrees. I personalize a lot of this. I take a lot of ownership in my work. And if somebody doesn't want me on a project, I take it personally because I would assume my work is not good enough. Or maybe I'm just not what they're looking for. Maybe my skill set is not what they need. It's like, I think it's a lot easier when there's different niches and categories going on, but I think it becomes a lot more difficult when you have projects that are in your niche, but you're still not the person they're looking for.
Right, and I think that's also partly where it comes into wording and like how to word it correctly without A, offending them, and B, just getting into a whole much bigger mess than it needs to be. And then there's also those people that just don't know how to take criticism, and it just becomes a whole mess that way too. And just knowing that, you kind of, especially in this industry, you kind of have to have thick skin to an extent of like, hey, here they're trying to make me better, but also I can't like just sit and cry about this in my room.
Yeah, well, for sure. This might be the better question I should have asked at the beginning, but how do you take criticism so that it's effective and moves you forward rather than preventing you from moving forward?
Right. Like I said, I think it's on just how that person goes about it, because if they come at me just basically just like, you need to do this or else you're fired, then I'm not going to respond well to that. Mm-hmm. But also in the same sense of basically I'd want them to deliver it to me blunt but also polite, and still have some respect for the fact that A, I'm a human being, I have feelings, but B, also how they want it to be delivered to them. And I mean, I think that's also part of just you have those base standards that you need to deliver news to people about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would say in addition to that, like realizing that art is very personal, and when people are involved in projects, especially if it's their project and you're critiquing somebody who's above you on the chain of command, especially when in production, then you have to be careful, because it's one thing your boss critiquing you, it's another thing an employee critiquing the boss.
Right.
You have to realize that they are in a position that is above you technically, even if whether they're qualified or not, the company or production or a person higher than them has designated them into that position, meaning they have a level of authority.
Yeah, and just going back to the point of there's always tension on set, definitely right after set or even on a set is not the best time to be giving critiques to people. I've been on a set where the director wanted critiques and gave out critiques during filming, which was obviously not the right time. Like, tell them, like, at a separate time, just basically pull them aside another day and basically be like, hey, just wanted to check in about this. This is what I didn't like. Not directly when everyone's tensions are high. We're all stressed out.
Well, I mean, I feel like on top of that, like, addressing people on set is very public. And when you're critiquing somebody, I mean, I go back, like, this podcast is partially a Christian podcast, but mostly about production and that kind of stuff. So I always go back to the Bible, and it talks about critiquing people one-on-one and not, like, embarrassing them. Like, if you can go to them individually with 1 to 2 other people and say, like, hey, here's what we've noticed collectively, you're much more likely to get the result that you're looking for if you are in a small group with them, because they don't feel embarrassed. They're more open to change, and they're looking, because most people are looking for opportunities to grow. And if it's presented to them in the right way, where they see you as someone who's taking their best interest to heart and you're trying to help them improve, then they're more likely to say, okay, yeah, I understand.
Mm-hmm.
And some people just don't want feedback. Don't even talk to them. Don't worry about it. They don't want feedback. They're not going to get any better. So don't hold it against yourself to make sure that they're doing better if they don't want to do better.
Right, exactly. Like, you can't change people's minds.
Absolutely. I mean, unless it directly affects you, unless it's directly affecting your job performance and that kind of stuff, then you really, I mean, if they don't want the feedback, they don't want the feedback. They're lost. I mean, so, but yeah, I feel like that's a solid place to stop. So do you want to plug social media, that type of stuff? Anything for yourself?
Yeah, sure. My Instagram is just zea.hirshberg. The studio, I'm not going to try to bother with that one, and all of that. But yeah, that's basically just where you can find me at.
You can find me at Andrew Mac Photo or AMAC Photo 92. And then you can also follow the podcast and the other creative education endeavors that I have on Queen City Collective. Thank you guys so much for listening, and go in peace.